Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 2 wide receiver rankings going into the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're talking about my top 36 wide receiver rankings, and as I do that, I'll give you guys my perspective, my opinion, and statistics that back up my thought process going into this week and why I believe these specific wide receivers are in the most advantageous positions. Now, speaking of advantageous positions, we always want to focus on matchups and strength of schedules in order to find which wide receivers on our rosters can potentially be against a very, lackluster secondary, or potentially have a corner matchup in which they're going to take advantage of and produce in fantasy based on that. So we'll talk about matchups. We'll talk about the top 36 rankings. Now, before we get into all of that, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support. We just recently surpassed 23,000 subscribers. It's absolutely insane. I cannot thank you guys enough. Our next goal, 24K. We're going for number 24, Kobe's number. Yesterday, the Clippers, they lost. They're not going to the Western Conference Finals. The Lakers have a clear shot. They just got to beat the Nuggets. We're going to capture championship number 17. We're doing it for Kobe. Let's go to 24,000 subs. I really do appreciate you guys supporting the channel, smashing that like button, and always staying up to date with the content I'm bringing out. Anyway, let's go ahead and let's start off by talking about matchups, because again, I always like to key in on matchups. And the graphic that I'm going to throw on screen for you guys right now are the strength of schedule for wide receivers going into week 2. And though we don't have a great sample size, it's only 1 week. At this moment in time, the Minnesota Vikings are giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers on a weekly basis in a half PPR scoring format. Now, as we can see, obviously the Green Bay Packers lit up this Minnesota Vikings secondary, and we knew that the cornerbacks at their, on that team were inexperienced, but we didn't really expect that kind of an outcome. That being said, 68.4 points will eventually average out. There's no way that that's going to happen to them every single week. And despite them having a matchup against T.Y. Hilton, Paris Campbell, I don't expect those kind of numbers to translate this upcoming week. Similar to the Seattle matchup. Yes, Matt Ryan was able to feed 3 wide receivers over 100 receiving yards a pop. But do you think Julian Edelman and or N'Keal Harry is going to be able to at least see some translated stats from Cam Newton based on the secondary performances of Seattle in week 1? I personally don't think so. So I think despite all of this information, there are some matchups that are going to eventually even themselves out, and we won't see Seattle up here as one of the worst secondaries every week, because typically they run a tight ship over there. So as of right now, going into this coming week, sure, the Jets, the Giants, the Lions, I think those are the 3 teams that will probably stay among the worst against opposing wide receivers on a weekly basis. But again, we'll talk about that in a little bit with the players going against them specifically. I also wanted to cover the teams that were giving up the least amount of points to opposing wide receivers. The Arizona Cardinals did not give up any points, but that mainly had to do with the fact that Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk out. George Kittle missed a lot of time, but again, he doesn't count in this. Kendrick Bourne did not do anything. I mean, there was no contribution from the wide receiver position for the San Francisco 49ers this past week, and therefore the Arizona Cardinals, as of this moment in time, are the best secondary. And look at the Miami Dolphins. Yes, the Miami Dolphins have made some improvements in terms of cornerback coverage and overall defensive presence, but is that a huge depiction? We'll see. I think Josh Allen will expose the secondary this week, or at least have some points and kind of level them out. But overall, hopefully these stats kind of give you guys a little bit of a representation of what exactly we can expect from these secondaries and the wide receivers potentially going against them. So we can go ahead and ship this off the screen and get into our rankings. All right, so we go into our top 36 wide receiver rankings going into week 2 of the fantasy football season. Starting off with my number 1. The guy was on the thumbnail last week, and my goodness, was he incredible this past week. Davante Adams had one of the most ridiculous performances in a week 1 that I've seen in a while. A lot of wide receivers come out and they pop off, but Davante Adams was on this pace last season after coming back from his turf toe injury, and it's 100% a great sight to see that he's maintaining this pace as the number 1 wide receiver of this Green Bay Packers offense and dominating secondaries. Now, I understand Minnesota secondary was underhanded and had a little bit of an inexperience at cornerback, but Detroit's secondary this upcoming week is going to be in trouble. Jeff Okudah, their 3rd overall pick of the 1st round in this NFL draft, he's still injured. Desmond Trufant's dealing with a hamstring injury. Coleman, their other cornerback, he's sent to the IR. They are struggling at cornerback. They are very hurt in the secondary. And the way that it looks with Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau, with Davante Adams, they're going to light up that secondary. Davante Adams had 17 targets, 14 receptions, 156 yards, and 2 touchdowns last week. Honestly, if he puts up similar scores, or at least has over 100 and a touchdown and maybe 8 grabs, I'm not really going to be surprised because Davante Adams is that talented, and with the opportunity against such a, underwhelming secondary, because they're going to be, scrambling to get guys into that organization. I think they probably signed somebody earlier today to try to, mitigate that kind of issue. But I think they're going to be in trouble, and I think Davante Adams is going to keep knocking on the door to score this upcoming weekend. So, yeah, he's my number one. All right, moving on to our number 2 player, we have ourselves Chris Godwin, and though he has a question mark over his shoulder, why is that the case, Andrew? Well, earlier today I read a report where he's currently in the concussion protocol. Supposedly he took a huge hit on Sunday and is only now, Wednesday, in the concussion protocol, which is a little bit weird in my opinion, because typically if you've taken a big hit on a Sunday or there's a sensor in your helmet that triggers and says there is a huge impact here, check this person for a concussion. I mean, that's the kind of technology helmets have right now. As of this moment in time, I would have thought that Chris Godwin would have been in the concussion protocol by Monday, not on Wednesday. So as of right now, I don't know if this is a precautionary measure. I don't know if this is going to affect his week 1 status. I could potentially see him missing this week. And if that being the case, Mike Evans still dealing with a little bit of a leg injury. We have ourselves Scotty Miller, who could be a great option this week against Carolina and their poor secondary. So again, as of right now, if Chris Godwin is to play this week, he's my number 2 wide receiver. I think he's got a great matchup on hand. Last year against the Carolina Panthers, he had 18 receptions, 272 receiving yards, and a touchdown in the 2 games against them. But again, being in concussion protocol is not a good thing, and we'll just have to keep an eye on his status. But I think if in fact he's ready to go and this is just a precautionary measure, then Chris Godwin should be a pretty good play this week. So we go ahead and we talk about our number 3, Julio Jones. Julio had a fantastic week in week 1. Obviously, the 12 targets definitely gave him a little bit of an upside there, but the 9 receptions for 157 yards, that is a beautiful number. He takes on the Dallas Cowboys this week. And from what we were able to see from Robert Woods going for 100 overall receiving yards, and the way that the Falcons play, the Falcons don't have a great defense. And what does that mean? That means the Dallas Cowboys are probably going to score early and potentially often. If that's the case, that leads Matt Ryan to having to sit back in the pocket and let the ball go out of his hands. It's going in the direction of Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, Russell Gage. They're going to spread out the offense, and they're going to be able to at least key in and try to pick apart this defense as best as they possibly can. So again, Julio has a great upside always, every week, and especially if he gets that touchdown. He gets that touchdown, he's getting to the next level. He's becoming a number 1 wide receiver every single week, like the number 1. So again, we're hoping for that upside. Obviously, Calvin Ridley's taking a lot of those red zone targets, but Julio is still a stud regardless because of his opportunity and his talent. We move on to number 4, DeAndre Hopkins. I've never seen DeAndre Hopkins have this many targets. I mean, he was absolutely incredible. 16 targets, 14 receptions for 151 against the San Francisco secondary. And I know the San Francisco 49ers secondary is not great against number 1 wide receivers. In fact, they've been getting torched by number 1 wide receivers for quite some time now. But with Richard Sherman going to the IR, that's not looking good for them. But what does this do for DeAndre Hopkins' confidence and the confidence of Kyler Murray? Now that he has an established number 1 wide receiver, you don't even need to worry about Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk did nothing. So you've got a guy that's literally going to haul in every single passing attempt from Kyler Murray for the rest of the season. And now you go against the Washington football team in week 2 at home in a stadium, no weather conditions, nothing to worry about. I think that as of right now, DeAndre Hopkins is in an advantageous position. The last time he played against Kendall Fuller, who is the starting cornerback that will probably be covering him this upcoming week, he used to play for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now he plays for the Washington football team. It was in the playoffs between the Houston Texans and the Chiefs. And DeAndre Hopkins had a great game. 9 catches for 118 receiving yards. If he goes in and keys on that again, has as many targets as he did last week. I know 16 is an unsustainable number. But if he can stay on that pace, we have ourselves DeAndre Hopkins in a very great position to be a top 5 wide receiver from here on out. So we move on and we talk about Tyreek Hill at number 5. Tyreek Hill sits at number 5, though he was on the thumbnail. Tyreek Hill is very volatile. I mean, last week we talk about it every single week when we talk about Tyreek Hill. Last week's touchdown in the second half saved his week because in the first half he was not a factor. He was more of a distraction. And to be honest, I think as of right now, against the Chargers secondary, they have struggled against him in the past, but typically they just double cover him. They put a safety over the top. They don't let him take the top off the defense. But I'm hoping that Tyreek Hill could end up, having a little bit of an upside or having that deep bomb play, that 70-yard touchdown that makes his week. But again, Last week, his week was salvaged by that touchdown. So let's hope he doesn't get into that territory. If he's going to put up 13 points a game, I'm okay with that. But we've got to be able to see some more upside rather than the potential of a downside play this week. That's what we're hoping for. But regardless, we're starting Tyreek Hill anyway. My number 6 in the last of the top 6 wide receivers is Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen balled out last week. I mean, it was an incredible performance. 6 catches for 110 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. The Green Bay secondary is not terrible either. But Adam Thielen continues to prove why he's one of the better wide receivers. And though he missed a lot of time last year due to injury, that he's still coming back and he's still a prominent wide receiver 1 in the National Football League. This upcoming week, he gets to take on the Indianapolis Colts secondary. And to be honest, the way that Gardner Minshew diced up that defense, though they were shorter passes, Gardner Minshew was still able to dink and dunk and dominate that Indianapolis secondary and defense. So I think this upcoming week, Kirk Cousins, not as much of a dink and dunk guy, will let the ball air out and will feed the ball in the direction of Adam Thielen, as he is, in my opinion, the lone receiver on that team and the lone receiving option that at least Kirk Cousins can rely upon on a weekly basis. Again, the Indianapolis Colts secondary, I'm not really too worried about them. And I think Adam Thielen can have himself another great week here in week 2. Now we go ahead and move on to our number 7, Amari Cooper. Now, Amari Cooper, besides the fact that he plays against the Atlanta Falcons this week, and DK Metcalf played well, Tyler Lockett played well, and honestly, Russell Wilson was able to do whatever he wanted. An 8% passing completion percentage against them. I think Amari Cooper is in a very advantageous position. And the fact that he had 14 targets for 10 receptions and 81 yards last week was an incredible number. Yes, he didn't see too much of Jalen Ramsey. That was more of Michael Gallup getting shut down on the other side of the field. But Amari Cooper funneling in 14 targets in his direction, that is such upside, especially in PPR leagues where you can get 10 receptions. That makes up your week easily. So going into this week with, in my opinion, against one of the worst secondaries in the National Football League, I think Amari Cooper and this Dallas Cowboys offense find themselves in a very great position, and he should be an automatic start this week without a doubt. Moving on to our number 8, we have ourselves Allen Robinson. And though this entire week has surrounded Allen Robinson with trade talks, negotiations for his contract, him, doing this Twitter cryptic stuff, I'm not really worried about that. Even though that's all I'm hearing about Allen Robinson, the only thing I want to hear and I want to talk about is Allen Robinson playing against the New York Giants secondary, because my goodness, is that an advantageous matchup. We talked about it earlier. The Giants have been struggling in the secondary. They've lost a couple players this offseason back there, and it's going to definitely show. I mean, just what JuJu Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, James Washington were able to do on Monday, that is going to be increased to another level. I know Mitchell Trubisky is not a great quarterback, but hopefully that confidence that he gained with that comeback victory against the Detroit Lions this past week will help him get to that next level. Feed Allen Robinson the ball more. Again, when there's more offensive threats on this field with Jimmy Graham, Anthony Miller, Tariq Cohen, David Montgomery succeeding in said offense, it's going to give Allen Robinson even more opportunities. So either way, he is the number 1 wide receiver of this team, and hopefully this week comes out and balls out. He's my number 8. Number 9 is Calvin Ridley. So we have ourselves the 2 Falcons wide receivers stacked on top of one another, and it shouldn't really be a surprise. Again, the incredible productivity they had, and again, it was a lot of garbage time from Matt Ryan, who in that game really did have a nice second half. In the first half was just pretty much an average quarterback, and then here comes Matt Ryan being able to dice up that Seattle Seahawks secondary. And I think this upcoming week against Dallas, there's always going to be an opportunity for them to come out and have to score every single possession, because again, their secondary and their defense is going to struggle, and Dallas is going to score, and that's going to put them on the back foot, and it's going to be an offensive game script where they're airing out the ball. Calvin really did prove himself as another one of these guys that, again, in this offense is going to be the red zone threat. It's not going to be Julio, because it never has been. Russell Gage is just a dink and dunk kind of guy that can make plays after the catch. But as much as they targeted Hayden Hurst in the end zone, he was pretty much bottled up last week, and I think they could probably bottle him up this week, which kind of leads us back to Calvin Ridley as my number 9 wide receiver in a pretty good matchup this week. Our number 10 on hand is JuJu Smith-Schuster. Now, we talked about him a little bit earlier against the New York Giants, and he had a great performance. 2 receiving touchdowns, 6 catches, and a total of 69 yards. All of that is fantastic. Again, JuJu Smith-Schuster with a terrible quarterback last year, or at least a terrible quarterback room with Doug Hodges and Mason Rudolph last year, wasn't able or given the opportunity to succeed. Also, he dealt with injuries. He's coming back for a comeback season similar to Adam Thielen. This week, plays against Denver. I think it's not an easy matchup, but it's going to be A.J. Boye on him. That being said, even with AJ Boye on AJ Brown got 8 targets, had 5 receptions. He dropped a couple passes, wasn't playing well. But if we can somehow, some way get JuJu Smith-Schuster in the position that Corey Davis was in last week, just running out routes and just crossing routes the entire game, I think there's a very good chance that JuJu Smith-Schuster has himself another great week going into week 2. We move on to our number 11, Robert Woods. Robert Woods came out the gate in the first drive and caught the ball 3 times. A couple screen passes, huge yards after the catch in this offense, and continues to be funnel targeted by Jared Goff. And though the game script for the Los Angeles Rams this past week wasn't really, hey, let's air out the ball. Rather, it was, we have to run the ball. Let's give it to Malcolm Brown, let him run the ball 19 plus times. Let's give it to Cam Akers, let him touch the ball 15 times on the ground. That game script really led them away from Higbee and Kupp. And going into this week, I think, again, Robert Woods being the only person to kind of show up and produce what they did last at the back end of the 2019 season and kind of bring that into 2020 thus far. Playing against the Philadelphia Eagles secondary, I don't think it's a problem. The last time I saw Robert Woods play against Darius Slayton on top of that, he had a pretty good game, scored a touchdown, and over 80 receiving yards. So Robert Woods, not really too worried about his matchup on hand this week. He should be another one of these top 12 wide receivers. He is my number 11. Moving on to number 12, we have DJ Moore. And though DJ Moore had a little bit of an underwhelming week 1 performance, I think against Tampa Bay, he's got a pretty good opportunity because I expect Tampa Bay to at least be winning and or win this game and have a pretty consistent lead. So where does that leave DJ Moore? That leaves him in a position where we've got to throw the ball with Teddy Bridgewater, and DJ Moore hopefully can get it open as much as possible. Last year in the 2 games he played against Tampa Bay, he had a total of 15 receptions and 162 total receiving yards, 0 touchdowns. But again, Tampa Bay is not one of these defenses that is just immune. Yes, they shut down Michael Thomas, but I don't think they'll be able to really send all of their resources in the direction of a DJ Moore, considering the ability for Robbie Anderson to take the top off the defense and or even Curtis Samuel out of the slot position to do so. And then they're always going to have to worry about Christian McCaffrey after the catch and stuff like that. So I think DJ Moore, I know he had a rough week 1, but again, you drafted him to be in this top 12 conversation because that's the kind of receiver he is. I hope he gets back on track this week. He is my number 12. Moving on to number 13, we have ourselves Mike Evans. Mike Evans is a little bit of a question mark himself, mainly because he dealt with an injury all of last week. Even with that, was questionable all week, was doubtful at a point, and then he ends up playing on Sunday, being a non-factor, catches 1 pass for a touchdown and 2 receiving yards. I mean, really just did nothing. And even after the game, Bruce Arians was like, I feel guilty that, I feel guilty in games that Mike Evans doesn't get 10 plus targets. Well, then maybe we should fix that. Maybe we should feed him the ball at 10 plus targets a single week. I mean, what are we waiting for? So honestly, I'm just precautious with Mike Evans. I'm hoping he's healthy and ready to go this week. And I'm hoping that Chris Godwin's also healthy and ready to go because both these guys on the field make each other better, in my opinion. Again, Chris Godwin wasn't able to succeed as much last week because there wasn't Mike Evans pulling away coverage and or attention of the defense. So hopefully this week they're both healthy and ready to go. Mike Evans as a precautionary number 13, otherwise would be in the top 12 conversation very easily this upcoming week against Carolina. Number 14 is Cooper Kupp. And as of right now, Cooper Kupp, though he had a little bit of a underwhelming week 1 performance, I think week 2 is a bounce back week against the Philadelphia secondary that, in my opinion, isn't one of the best secondaries in the league. Hasn't been in quite some time. And though Dwayne Haskins wasn't able to take advantage of it, Dwayne Haskins is not that great of a quarterback. He did definitely struggle against that defense. But this week, I think Cooper Kupp, again, we got to give him another try. I mean, he was a top 3 wide receiver last season in fantasy points. Had 10 plus touchdowns. Those numbers are eventually going to start to kick back into place. I know last week, again, like I mentioned with Robert Woods, the game script was not there for them. So going forward, Cooper Kupp will get back on the horse and potentially produce for us this week against Philadelphia. Number 15 is Tyler Lockett. And Tyler Lockett, as of right now, plays against the New England Patriots this week. And the way I see Tyler Lockett and his potential this week is kind of based on what exactly the coverage is going to look like. Because we know that the secondary has a great group of cornerbacks and or safeties. We'll probably get Stephon Gilmore on DK Metcalf. So where does that leave Tyler Lockett? Tyler Lockett last week, 8 catches, 8 receptions, over 100 receiving yards. Great numbers. That's exactly what you want to see, especially when you're taking advantage of a poor secondary like the Atlanta Falcons. But with those target numbers, he's always going to have touchdown upside. We're always going to see Tyler Lockett play in the slot position and or move outside and be able to stretch the defense. I think Tyler Lockett, as of right now, again, in comparison to DK Metcalf, is probably the safer play because DK always needs that touchdown, while Tyler Lockett is going to be a far more efficient receiver for said offense. So I think this week, especially in that matchup in which they'll probably have to pass the ball in order to be able to win that game, I think Tyler Lockett is going to be relied upon heavily. And again, is another one of these safe wide receivers in the mid-teens that you can rely upon every single week because of how great Russell Wilson is. And to be honest, if Russell Wilson keeps playing the way he has, it's just going to keep getting better. All right, so our number 16 is DJ Chark. Again, DJ Chark, last week, he scored a touchdown, but 3 targets, 3 receptions. That is a concerning number. And when I saw that on Sunday, and I thought to myself, okay, maybe they didn't need DJ Chark to lose his mind. Sure. Laviska Shenault got a little bit more targets. Even Keelan Cole, who hasn't done anything in a couple of years, got more targets. But we all know who the number 1 wide receiver of this offense is. It is DJ Chark. They were raving about him all offseason. The coaching staff of the Jacksonville Jaguars, specifically Gruden, saying, I don't see a single weakness in DJ Chark's game. So going forward into this week, our number 16 is DJ Chark. Going into this week, he plays against the Tennessee Titans. And though the Tennessee Titans looked like a good defense last week, it really wasn't against a great offense. Sure, the Denver Broncos are improving and Drew Lock is getting better, but in terms of a wide receiver presence, Jerry Jeudy just wasn't able to cut it. Now, I know DJ Chark's usage last week, he gets that touchdown, he gets himself over the hump, but 3 targets, 3 receptions, that's not going to cut it. I know Gardner Minshew was feeling comfortable. They dominated against that Indianapolis secondary because, again, Gardner Minshew was 19 for 20 passing. That kind of efficiency is not going to happen. I think the game script's going to turn on their head. I think Tennessee's going to come out. They're going to score consistently. And that's going to force Gardner Minshew to have to pass the ball more and be a little bit sporadic with it because the pass rush is coming this week. So DJ Chark hopefully will be relied upon as their number 1. I know Shenault and or Keelan Cole were getting a little bit more targets. What was it, 4 targets a pop each? I think those numbers are going to settle out. They'll probably stay that range, while DJ Chark probably triples his targets this upcoming week, and that's why I have him at number 16. I got a lot of high hopes and potential upside for DJ Chark this upcoming week. Moving on to our number 17, we have ourselves DK Metcalf, and I talked about DK Metcalf a little bit in relation to Tyler Lockett because I think he's going to pull the coverage of Stefon Gilmore, and that in itself, it's a little bit threatening, but Stefon Gilmore's been dealing with a hamstring injury, and I think if DK Metcalf, with his big body, his size, his speed, can either take advantage in the red zone or at least potentially have a deep bomb that is going to set him up for success, the targets are going to keep coming in his direction. And I know that he dropped a couple passes last week. Those mistakes are going to be, at least straightened up. He played against a very weak secondary last week. It's a little bit different. The script's going to be pretty different this week. I think that there's still a possibility that DK Metcalf can stay consistent within this offense against the New England secondary. But it's going to take a lot for him. But I think he's going to end up getting it done this week. Regardless, I think many of you are starting him as a wide receiver too this week. Moving on. Marquise Hollywood Brown, and he was very impressive last week. Now, a lot of it had to do with the fact that the Cleveland secondary was depleted, and that's going to be a big factor for the Thursday night game for Cincinnati versus Cleveland with their two of their 3 starting cornerbacks gone and one of their starting safeties, the rookie Grant Delpit, out for the season. So Marquise Brown, over 100 receiving yards. Sure, we would have loved to see him score, but if you're going to go ahead and be the deep threat of this offense and be able to produce as such, that is fantastic. This week he plays against the Houston secondary, and in my opinion, just looking at what Houston was able to accomplish on Thursday against Patrick Mahomes, their secondary was in shambles. I mean, Demarcus Robinson was honestly on pace for a 2-touchdown game. Sammy Watkins ended up playing fantastic. Even Tyreek Hill salvaged the week. They couldn't stop Travis Kelce, who's pretty much another wide receiver on the field. They really couldn't stop the passing game. So I think as soon as Baltimore comes in and starts really establishing the run, and Houston starts to see that there's holes in their defense once again in the running game, they're going to have to cheat into the box, and that's just going to open up more Lamar Jackson to Marquise Brown antics, which will lead to their success and some fantasy upside this week at number 18. Number 19 is A.J. Brown, and I know A.J. Brown, he didn't outproduce Corey Davis, and he was pretty much a non-factor on Monday night's game against the Denver Broncos, but to be honest, I'm not too worried about that. I think A.J. Brown has proven why he is a top 20 wide receiver in the National Football League. He did that for the entirety of the second half of the 2019 season. From weeks 7 through 17 of the regular season, this guy was a touchdown monster, big play upside, and was consistent because Ryan Tannehill was able to get him the ball. Though he did not have a great performance, the targets were there. What was it? 8 targets, 5 receptions. Sure, didn't have too many yards. It was almost, 39 yards, 40 yards. Those numbers can definitely improve over time. And I think this week, playing against Jacksonville, when the defense is trying to at least stop the bleeding and stop Derrick Henry in the running game, you're going to potentially see the high upside of an A.J. Brown on a deep pass or even out of the backfield. The dude could be used anywhere. He's a great athlete, and I think this upcoming week he'll get back on track in terms of fantasy production and be a consistent producer. Number 20 is Terry McLaurin, another one of these second-year wide receivers. We just keep dropping in second-year wide receivers. Chark, Metcalf, Brown, and then McLaurin. McLaurin, in my opinion, of the group, is in a very interesting situation. The quarterback position, Dwayne Haskins, though they've played together at college, is going to be the biggest determining factor of Terry McLaurin's success. I think last week he should have been able to at least break out, have another couple good catches or passes in his direction, because again, Terry McLaurin is the number one of this team, and you have to be able to spread the ball out to this guy in order to make him a factor on the field, because outside of that, you cannot survive on a weekly basis running the ball 17 times with Peyton Barber for 29 yards. You need to be able to stretch the field, and hopefully they can go ahead and do that this upcoming week with Terry McLaurin. I think that the coverage of the Arizona Cardinals and the defense of the Arizona Cardinals has improved. They've brought in a lot of pieces. Patrick Peterson's the test this week. I'm not sure what Terry McLaurin is up to or whether he's up to the task, but he's got big play upside. He's always been a guy that with 5 catches could easily make a week because he scores a touchdown and has over 100 receiving yards. He's just got to be able to take on this number one coverage from Patrick Peterson and break out. So it's up to him. It's up to, Dwayne Haskins first and foremost, but I think he'll be able to have a bounce back week here in week 2 as my number 20. Number 21 is Stefon Diggs. Now, earlier today I read a report. John Brown is dealing with an injury at this moment in time, and if that's the case and John Brown potentially misses this upcoming week or is limited, that just puts more pressure on Stefon Diggs to make plays, and that's going to send more targets in his direction. This past week, 9 targets, 8 receptions, 80 some odd receiving yards. That's a great number of production. As of right now, against the Miami secondary, they've got some good cornerbacks. They have Byron Jones. They have Xavier Howard. They have some decent coverage players in terms of the cornerback position. But Stefon Diggs, if he is going to get himself 10, 12 targets, he's going to succeed in this offense. Because, again, it still is the Miami defense. They will struggle. They'll find a way to figure out, a way to blow their coverage and allow Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen to be able to succeed. So as of right now, he's my number 21 wide receiver on the week with the potential, if John Brown is out, there's going to be more targets in the direction of a Stefon Diggs. Our next wide receiver I wanted to mention is Keenan Allen. So Keenan Allen didn't produce very well this past week, mainly because Tyrod Taylor was an absolute joke. Now, if Tyrod Taylor doesn't turn it around, I expect him to be replaced in 2 weeks. Maybe even this week. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, they could pull him easily in the second half, and that will potentially bring Keenan Allen more production because Keenan Allen has produced very well against his Kansas City Chiefs in the past. I mean, last year, 17 grabs, 153 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns in the 2 contests against them. So we're hoping for some improvement. We're hoping for this kind of upside from Keenan Allen. Again, he's one of the best wide receivers in the league. They paid him as such. Now you got to be able to utilize him. He's got to see more targets. He's got to see more effective targets. They cannot be inaccurate passes. 10 yards over his head, on the ground, etc., in a defender's hands. We don't want to see that. So hopefully the quarterback play turns around and helps Keenan Allen get to that next level. Otherwise, we're going to see a replacement real soon, which honestly might help Keenan Allen overall. The next wide receiver on hand is Michael Gallup. And I know Michael Gallup, in my opinion, last week should have been a better play, but he got the Ramsey treatment. He got covered. Even the biggest play of the day, the 41-yard bomb that he caught, the offensive PI, you just can't extend the arm. That's all it is. If you keep the arm out there and you don't have that little bit of an elbow tweak to push, you have yourself another 40 points there. He breaks 10 points. He's a decent play last week. But instead, he plays against the Atlanta Falcons this week, doesn't have the Ramsey treatment. In fact, honestly, this looks like a vacation to me. This is going to be a matchup in which Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, even CeeDee Lamb are all going to be able to produce against the secondary because, again, the Cowboys coming out and just putting up a goose egg in terms of offensive production, especially in that second half of that Rams game, it doesn't click. So they've got to be able to come out, reprove themselves, recalibrate, and potentially show the league why they are one of the better attacking pass offenses. And Michael Gallup's going to be able to help them do that again this upcoming week. Our last of our top 24 wide receivers is Will Fuller. He plays against the Baltimore Ravens this week. It's a tough matchup. Marlon Humphreys, Marcus Peters. That coverage is going to be a problem for him. But in week 1, he was the number 1 wide receiver, and Brandon Cooks seems to still be injured. Even if Brandon Cooks is on the field, I feel like that helps Will Fuller kind of open up some opportunities for him. Will Fuller, as of right now, last week, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 112 receiving yards. If he can continue to see that 10 target number, he's always going to have the upside and potential of a garbage time touchdown and or early touchdown based on a big play and boom ability of Will Fuller that we've seen in the past. I'm confident that with that opportunity and with his health being in check, he's going to be able to continue to succeed in this offense. And I think, really, Deshaun Watson has nowhere else to go with the ball besides Will Fuller, and hopefully they'll continue to key in on that. He's my number 24. We're moving on to our number 25. It's T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton, as of right now, plays against the Minnesota Vikings this upcoming week. Like we talked about a little bit earlier with the matchups, I mean, goodness, did the Green Bay Packers absolutely torch the Minnesota Vikings secondary and their inexperienced wide receivers. But to be honest, T.Y. Hilton didn't even play that well last week. He had a couple targets here and there, but honestly was out-targeted by Paris Campbell. Didn't have that big playability with Phillip Rivers because Phillip Rivers is too busy dinking and dunking to his running backs. But to be honest, I feel like T.Y. Hilton can be a productive wide receiver. He could easily be a top 30 wide receiver, and specifically number 25 this week because, again, if in fact they could take advantage of that secondary and really just allow T.Y. Hilton to get those 10 targets that he needs and feed in the ball to an ample extent, he's always going to have that ability for upside. He's like a Will Fuller. He's like a Deshaun Jackson where he has the ability to make one play change the entire week with a bomb over the top. He's just got to be able to see the eventual production there. He needs to see the 6 targets that'll eventually get him that 60 yards, and then he can have a couple targets of bombs that could potentially get him to the end zone and over the hump in terms of fantasy production. But I expect him to have a bounce back week here. He's my number 25. 26 is Marvin Jones because, again, the status of Kenny Golladay is still questionable. In fact, it's probably near the area of probably him not playing this week. He has not practiced today, and that is concerning. Now, Marvin Jones did not play well against the Chicago Bears, but that being said, he plays against the Green Bay Packers, and the way that game script is going to work, like I've mentioned with Davante Adams is going to torch that secondary, and if that's being the case, then Matthew Stafford's going to be at a negative game script. He's going to have to throw the whole time, and who's his number 1 wide receiver? It's Marvin Jones, and hopefully Marvin Jones can play far better than he did last week, which I think he can. Again, Adam Thielen was able to take advantage of it. Marvin Jones can find himself in a touchdown situation or at least getting himself a little bit more targets. Again, there were a couple wide receivers in that offense that did not deserve as many targets as they got in comparison to Marvin Jones. So hopefully he'll be able to separate from the coverage and pull some targets in his direction this week. He's my number 26. Moving on to number 27, we have ourselves AJ Green. I talked about it a little bit earlier. Greedy Williams, Kevin Johnson, Grant Delpit, those guys are gone. They're dealing with guys that they've had to bring in after the fact based on those injuries, and or they're working on their backup quarterbacks. They still have Denzel Ward there, but I do think that AJ Green was a pass interference call away from a touchdown last week. It was a little bit of an interesting call there, but to be honest, I think AJ Green is kind of looking like the number 1 wide receiver of this offense once again. Sure, he wasn't able to produce at an extremely high level last week because the level of coverage from the Los Angeles Chargers, but on top of it, because Joe Burrow is still finding himself in this offense and being able to at least find some comfort there. If he can find the comfort in AJ Green, I think AJ Green could really have himself a great week against Cleveland this week. But again, we're going to be safe with it. We'll have him at 27. He's definitely got upside, but we got to be cautious. Moving on to our number 28 is Odell Beckham Jr. Every time I trust this guy, he burns me. And even though that's on me, because again, I'm setting my own lineup and I am putting my faith in Odell Beckham Jr., I think that against Cincinnati, he should be fine. If they're going to run the ball the entire game, or if they're just going to let Nick Chubb just take over the entire game, then we could see Odell Beckham disappear, and he could be the 2nd wide receiver. He could have the 3rd most targets on the team, behind Kareem Hunt and or Jarvis Landry potentially. I wouldn't even be surprised if that happened. But again, approach Odell Beckham with your own precautions. I think Odell Beckham is a wild card on a weekly basis. He has such talent that honestly could make him a top 10 wide receiver every week, but he's just not utilized or given the opportunity to really get there. I mean, the amount of offensive firepower he had with the New York Giants in comparison to what he's dealing with in Cleveland, it's a joke to see that a player of his caliber is playing at such a low level. So hopefully, Kevin Stefanski, you shape your stuff up. On top of it, Baker Mayfield, if he doesn't start producing, just get Case Keenum in there. I mean, I'm not even kidding. I think Case Keenum could deliver the ball to OBJ. Moving on, we have number 29, Julian Edelman. I think Julian Edelman is going to have a little bit of an uptick of opportunity in production this week based on the game script. You play against Seattle. It is in Foxborough, but Seattle's going to probably force them to have to score pretty quickly and or more often than they did last week against Miami. Because again, Miami's game script was, hey, we're going to run the ball with Cam Newton. We're going to be able to at least kill some clock here. We'll pass the ball here and there if in fact we need it. Otherwise, we're not really trying to show anybody anything. Great, that's fine. You can do that against Miami, but you can't do that against Seattle, especially when they score as much as they do. So Julian Edelman this week will be asked to do more. He'll potentially get more targets, which will lead to more success. And I think if, in fact, he can get a little bit comfortable with Cam Newton in the red zone, that could be an extra level of depth for Edelman going forward. Our number 30 is Emmanuel Sanders. With Michael Thomas out for several weeks, quote unquote, there needs to be a wide receiver that steps up within that offense. Besides Alvin Kamara and Jared Cook, who I think are the number 1 and 2 receiving options in that offense going forward, I think the third receiving option is Emmanuel Sanders. He is still potentially in line for a good 9 to 10 targets this upcoming week. And if, in fact, he could see the favor of a Breeze in the red zone as a receiving threat there, like he did last week scoring a touchdown, that's always going to lead his upside to the next level. But again, even if it doesn't, he's still going to have the opportunity in an offense against the Raiders defense that, in my opinion, again, you got to think about it this way. If Michael Thomas is out of the game, that's almost 10 plus targets a week being spread out amongst the rest of the wide or receiving options. So Sanders is going to get some trickle down from that, and that's definitely going to help him, at least in fantasy, this upcoming week. The next option is Anthony Miller at number 31. Like I talked about with Allen Robinson has a great matchup, and so does Anthony Miller. Anthony Miller sitting in the slot position, it's no problem there because, again, he produced very well last week, especially when they needed him to do so in clutch times. Scored a touchdown. So if, in fact, they could get him the ball more often, especially early in the game, and get him into a rhythm, I think Anthony Miller can be a definite boost in terms of this offense and help them out, especially against the secondary that struggled as much as they did last week against those receivers from Pittsburgh. So Anthony Miller, I think, could be a really good play this week at my number 31. Tyler Boyd, my number 32. Similar to A.J. Green. I think A.J. Green is obviously the number 1 there. Tyler Boyd did not have as many targets, but he goes against a very suspect secondary. So I think Tyler Boyd could be a guy that you could just wait on and play one of the better prospects ahead of him, or you can try to throw him out on Thursday night and hope that Joe Burrow is going to find him for a touchdown, because it's a very possible outcome this upcoming week. But again, there's always the uncertainty of what Joe Burrow is going to be capable of doing. Again, it's a short week, very little time for being able to prepare for this team. So again, Tyler Boyd is a good option based on the matchup and his past production and or opportunity within the offense, but it's a little bit different with Joe Burrow. So we're just trying to adjust and kind of see what he's capable of. Jarvis Landry's 31, similar in that matchup. Again, I think Jarvis Landry, as of right now, dealing with that hip injury, was limited and probably is not going to practice all week until Thursday. So as of right now, that definitely doesn't keep him on track to potentially play. I mean, he could miss, and that wouldn't be a surprise. And that kind of upgrades Odell Beckham. But if Jarvis Landry's on the field, he's going to produce. He's always been a great wide receiver in this offense. And even last year against Cincinnati, in the 2 games that he played against them, 6 total receptions for 158 receiving yards and a touchdown. He's played against them at a pretty good rate in the last couple seasons. So I think as of right now, Jarvis Landry at number 33 is a pretty safe spot. We move on to our number 34, Darius Slayton. Had a fantastic Monday night game. As long as he is getting those kind of targets and red zone opportunity, Daniel Jones is going to continue to look for him. I mean, Daniel Jones found him many times last year. Darius Slayton had these big game performances, but then in other weeks was very volatile and did not end up producing. But if in fact he's going to see these kind of targets on a weekly basis, that'll get him to a protected rate of receptions that is going to at least give him a balance of production every single week. So hopefully the targets are still going to be there. The receptions and receiving yards will be there, and then the upside of a touchdown will eventually get there. So that's why he sits at number 34 as of right now. Number 35 is CeeDee Lamb. Like I talked about earlier, Atlanta's secondary is terrible. But the question is, how much production can we get out of CeeDee Lamb this week? He did find 6 targets, 5 receptions, had himself a decent game, but there's always going to be an upside there. If, for example, there's a potential that Michael Gallup disappears or Amari Cooper's targets get, snuffed out and CeeDee Lamb's wide open. I won't be surprised if this guy's scoring a touchdown this upcoming week. I honestly think that the Cowboys are going to light up that secondary, and a lot of people might be surprised by that, but you really shouldn't be, because if Russell Wilson can go out there in week 1 and they're only running the ball 14 times in a week, and they're the Seahawks when they're a team that should be running the ball 52% of the time, it's kind of interesting. So I expect this Dallas Cowboys offense to unleash a little bit, and CeeDee Lamb could be the catalyst of that in the slot position potentially. Jamison Crowder is my number 36. He plays against San Francisco 49ers. It's a tough matchup on hand, but again, 13 targets, 7 receptions, over 100 receiving yards and a touchdown. Again, he did have that one catch that went for 70 plus yards and a touchdown. But if you're going to haul in 13 targets, that is eventually going to lead to success. I mean, let's not forget week 1 of last season had 17 targets and 14 receptions. He has the capabilities of being the guy that is the only receiver on this offense getting targets, especially with the amount of talent they have. I mean, they're going to be having Frank Gore as their starting running back with Kalen Ballage as their backup this upcoming week. That in itself does not lead to success. In fact, that leads to the opposite of success. That leads to a negative game script and having to feed the ball to Jamison Crowder for the entirety of the second, third, and fourth quarter. And the amount of targets and receptions he gets there, despite the lack of, yardage, I'm not really worried about, because the receptions are going to be the big difference maker there overall. So Jamison Crowder closes out our top 36 here this week. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. I really do appreciate you guys' continued support. These are my top 36 wide receiver rankings. Again, these are always subject to change. I want to talk about a couple of receivers before we shut out today. These are the 4 players above me: Michael Thomas, Cortland Sutton, Devontae Parker, Kenny Golladay. 4 wide receivers that I'm not sure are going to play this week. I know Michael Thomas is probably going to miss multiple weeks. I know Kenny Golladay is not looking on, at the rate that they'd want him to be to at least come back this upcoming week. But there's a potential that Cortland Sutton or Devontae Parker do play this week. So keep an eye on that. We'll keep you guys updated. For those of you who are looking to get updated rankings, flex rankings, you can go to patreon.com/AndrewKiorkof, or you can go ahead and come over to this channel Sunday morning, 8 a.m. PST to 10 a.m. PST. We'll be live streaming here on the channel, giving you guys some advice, updated rankings, etc. at the wide receiver position. So maybe if they're ready to go by Sunday, then we can throw them into our lineups if we feel confident again with the matchup and their health and that they've practiced a good amount. But either way, those are the players that I wanted to go ahead and mention. Make sure that we're all on pace with that. Thank you everybody for watching. Make sure you smash the like button. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about quarterbacks and tight ends. I'll try to post those early tomorrow before the Thursday night game. Thank you everybody, and I'll see you guys. Peace.